Your weakness may be your weakness may be that the prospecting, or it may be your product knowledge, or it may be your follow through, or whatever it happens to be. Go attack it, make it your strength. That's my challenge. So, welcome to Wealth Wednesday. We're so excited to have you here. I'm Jody Humphrey here with my partners Zach and Kimberly Odie, leading the charge today. I'm here in Atlanta, Georgia, and Zach and Kimberly are over in Charleston, South Carolina. I got a great program lined up today. One of the great things I think that we have is our team culture is this call on Wednesdays. It creates an era of confidence, an air of confidence. That's what we want to do because everything we do, building and recruiting, is a function of confidence. Sales are a function of confidence. Prospecting is a function of confidence, and then it creates more confidence, and it just starts swirling. And so that's what we're doing. You could almost call this Confidence Wednesday. And that's really what we're about. So we have great resources. No other company has the resources we have from a corporate level, from our parent company level, all the way down to our systems and our technology systems, both inside our company and outside of the company around us. And then within this call on every Wednesday, we have the very best. I don't think there's anybody better than the group we bring to bear on Wednesdays to come do this presentation. Now, I would not be the leader that I want to be, hope to be, if I don't challenge you guys that tomorrow night, 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, we're in a full growth mode. We have a corporate overview. We have a BOP, business opportunity presentation, and we've got a lot of momentum. I'm challenging you guys to be on and to have a guest on. So you get them on, they're going to join. We're on fire. We got a huge building month going, and we've had but right at 150 people over the last 2 weeks on that call. And I'm expecting to have over 100 tomorrow night. So tomorrow night at 9, be on to hear our overview, knock your socks off. So having said that, let's get
Non-Eastern.
9 Eastern time. Thank you. And so let's get started today. The great Tim O'Rourke is coming to us today. And I'm excited to focus on Tim. Tim's an absolute stud. He's a great guy, good man, absolutely man of integrity. And it's funny, I made a decision that I'm not going to bring in a great new prospect personally once every 4 to 6 weeks. I'm going to do it once every 7 to 10 days. And so I made that commitment. And I had a great guy at the meeting last night, and it was going well. This guy's a former pro football player, total stud. And you know who really knocked his socks off is Tim. He saw Tim and he said, Tim O'Rourke. They knew each other, and he was all excited. That's one of the reasons he's really interested in our company is because Tim. So, Tim, we're excited to hear from you today. We're giving him a little more time than normal because you got a great program lined up. Be ready to learn. Take notes. Take this information and go share it. I think you're going to be excited. So, Tim, we're so excited to have you today. You are muted.
There we go. Thanks
Yes,
so much,
sir.
Judy. Yeah, appreciate it. Everybody hear me?
Yes, sir.
All right. So I've been doing a lot of research on something that I think will give you some in-depth kind of background knowledge on money and where it's all going. As we've seen over the last probably 10 plus years, money has been redefined and how it affects us, what we do, understanding the background on it, and understanding how governments work, how you work, and why we sell dreams. I think this may pull it all together for you. This is so important because dream selling is what we do and why it's important. So, what I want to do is take you back first in a little bit of history of where this all comes from. So, this great country of ours, we're all immigrants here. My family came from Germany and Ireland, and we all have different backgrounds where our parents came from, right? And as this government formed back in 1776 and moved forward, we all come from different backgrounds. We all came together here, formed states, and the government came together. Well, as the government, I don't think a lot of us realize the government really didn't have any taxation on Americans back until 1913. So in 1913, it all changed. So this is when prior to 1913, the government was funded through tariffs. Did everybody know that? Did you know that the U.S. government funded itself by tariffs? So it charged tariffs on the goods that were brought into the country. And so that all changed in 1913. So what happened is the 16th Amendment was ratified in 1913, and Congress was authorized to levy federal taxes on Americans. And this is basically when it was called the Bureau of Internal Revenue, later known as the IRS, as we all know it today. They implemented at the time. This shows you how interesting this was, and you'll understand why we say where are taxes going. At the time, they implemented a 1% tax, get a load of this, on anyone who made over $3,000. So if you made over $3,000, anything over $3,000, you were taxed 1% on that money, which only affected 3% of the population at the time. And I'll get back to why this is important. So that was the 16th Amendment that was ratified at the time. The president was Woodrow Wilson, who signed also the Federal Reserve Act into law. And he established 12 regional Federal Reserve banks that also had a board of governors based in Washington, D.C. to act as lenders to the banks, to all the other banks. So basically, they were known as the lender of last resorts, is how it was positioned. And obviously, that's formed the Federal Reserve as we know it today. So 1913 really marked the convergence of three permanent structures that exist today. That's the permanent income taxation that we see, that we get our taxes paid today, centralized monetary authority, and then then they take controls basically away from the state and gave it to the federal government. So this basically gave control to the government to have deficit spending, obviously, as we see this as a crisis that we're in right now. Also established the government bureaucracies in the federal government that we see so many employees that are in the government, and made possible modern warfare, welfare states, and the debt-based finance possible. So as the federal government transformed from a tariff-funded entity into a modern fiscal type of monetary state, it also made capable the financing itself through taxes, borrowing, and currency management. Does that sound familiar? This all happened in 1913 now, okay? So let's fast forward real quickly from 1913 to World War I. World War I was an interesting situation. We entered it in 1917. The federal government started running huge deficit spending. Prior to that, there was no deficit spending hardly in the U.S. government. So World War I, we had to fund all of our war machine, tanks, ships, guns, bullets, hand grenades, whatever. So we had to produce all this equipment and fund it. So it created this huge deficit spending that occurred. And so the U.S. national debt didn't shrink back to pre-war levels after World War I. Instead, it remained high even after that, relative to the size of the economy. So the trend was established and really continued after World War I into deficit spending mentality. So I'm trying to set the stage here so you understand what happened. So every war since then basically established what happened. And let's go to World War II, which was magnified, basically because the Great Depression, which was right around, 1929, what had a big lingering effect on the U.S. economy. We were still separate from Europe that time, but the Great Depression really had a huge effect on everything. Nearly 40% of the U.S. economy, the GDP, was tied to the war during World War II. So what happened is taxes rose very sharply during World War II. And who's going to argue with the government at the time? It was sold as the war, being patriotic, pay your taxes, buy U.S. savings bonds, which you got very little interest on. Back then, my parents, I think, bought a house, and your interest on your house was 2.5% or something. It was crazy low. Um, by the way, during World War II, payroll withholding taxes was introduced. So that made collecting taxes by the government very easy. So this was established at the time. And this is where deficit spending became the norm. Okay. So from World War II up until 1971, pretty much deficit spending started accumulating. No one really cared about it. And as we all know, 1971, I'm going to move forward here pretty quickly. President Nixon takes the US dollar off the gold standard. Okay. Why is this so important? Well, this is when the dollar was pegged to $35 an ounce. So the gold, we had more gold in Fort Knox. Everybody's heard of Fort Knox. We had more gold in Fort Knox than any other country in the world. We backed the dollar. So if you wanted to turn a dollar in, you could get it was backed by gold. And in 1971, the US ended the dollar's convertibility into gold, effectively moving the world uh, or our currency into what's called a fiat currency system. From that point forward, the dollar was no longer backed by anything other than the confidence in our government, its taxing authority on the people. Maybe you heard Paul Dietrich talk about this. The strength of the economy, our ability to tax the people, okay? That's what it's backed by. This shift from the dollar backing removed the natural constraint on money creation, enabling basically to a persistent deficit spending mentality, and hopefully accelerating debt growth. The more and more debt that was what we did in Congress. Is we could spend more than the revenue that the government was bringing in, making inflation the primary mechanism for managing excessive obligations. All right, so let me talk about gold real quickly, because I think you have to understand how gold plays in all this. Gold, by the way, is something that you're seeing central banks buy right now, right? We're seeing gold as a hedge on inflation, and it's a hedge because there's a lot of geopolitical fear out there, and because interest rates are coming down. That's kind of what everybody's hoping. The Fed is going to decrease rates, so that means gold's going to go up, and also the U.S. dollar is weakening. When you look at all these effects and the geopolitical situation out there, that means that gold is going to strengthen it. Gold is going to be worth more. The problem with precious metals is the physical state of them is that you got to pay them to sit somewhere. They've got to be physically guarded. They've got to be insured. So gold, if you buy gold, it sits there. It doesn't do anything. It's not working for you. It's a worthless asset, basically. The only reason it does anything, right, Zach? I mean, you understand this. Jody, you understand this. Kimberly, you understand this. Is it's working because of inflation, because of fear, because of all these the fiscal policy issues that are going on right now. So we're seeing gold now way up over $5,000. We're seeing silver over $117 an ounce. Crazy, right? And so we're going to see this continue now, just because of the implications of what's going on in the world. And then there's crypto. So we have all of these factors on what's redefining money. And it's interesting that crypto now is another monetary currency. It's basically a digital money system that it's on a blockchain kind of technology designed to operate outside traditional banking systems and be a protective value in a world that is expanding debt and basically currency debasement. But there's nothing behind it again, other than its scarcity, right? And so you've got crypto, you got gold, which is now gold is considered the second reserve currency of the world, and still the U.S. dollar is the number one reserve currency because nothing else can still challenge it. And I've talked about that in the past. So now let me segue into this. This is something I want you to understand and why what we do is so important. As of the end of 2025, the US federal budget was running a pretty persistent, sizable annual deficit. And this is projected by the Congressional Budget Office, which is a nonpartisan office, to reach about 1.8 to 1.9 trillion deficit. $1.9 trillion federal deficit in 2025, right? So let me put this into context. This compares to a 50-year average deficit of roughly 3.8% of GDP. Now that's a fact, okay? So that $1.9 trillion deficit is 6.2% of GDP. That's not sustainable. I can tell you that right now. That's a fact. That is not sustainable. So federal spending remains extremely high as compared to revenue. Just that percentage to revenue is driven primarily by the cost of mandatory programs like Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid, okay? Under current law, the federal revenues are projected to grow modestly as a share of GDP. Okay, what does that mean? Basically, that Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid are going to continue to grow to exceed record levels, just basically because of the implication of these three programs are the impact of them are going to affect the federal the cost of these of the deficit, basically. So what this means is if you put all these numbers in perspective using macro kind of ratios, debt held by the public, the portion most economists focus on is expected to remain at historical high levels relative to the size of the economy. So under the CBO kind of last projections, is this ratio is likely to rise from near 100% of GDP in 2025 to well over 120% by 2035. Okay, so why does this matter? A debt to GDP ratio at or above 100% is rare outside of wartime. So back to the wars, like I was talking about, World War I, World War II, Vietnam War. These are times when you see debt spike. This is when you see deficit spending spike. We saw deficit spending spike at different times now, lately carry over by the COVID experience, by 2008, 2009. And so we're seeing that the effect of this now is we've reached a point of inflection where the deficit has gotten so big that we're in that range. By contrast, the US average roughly is 69% debt to GDP ratio over the last 50 years. So this puts the US kind of in uncharted ground. So let me move now into some of the major drivers of the debt. So we've talked about the major spending of entitlement. So the major programs, obviously, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, right? So if you probably heard of Harry Dent, he's this guy that did this whole theory on the spending wave theory. He argued that demographic cycles drive economies. He predicted the 1990s boom, the rising healthcare costs, the aging population due to the baby boomers, right? So their spending influences thereby being able to forecast cycles in the economy. This is something that we all see still today. The baby boomers are now retiring at 10,000 a day. And so the more baby boomers that come into retirement are using more and more of Social Security, more Medicare, more Medicaid. And so that's going to create more use of Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid. So that's why they're forecasting more use of the mandatory spending and entitlement. So that's number one. Interest on the debt. Interesting here is interest costs on the federal debt now is one of the fastest growing components of the federal budget. In fact, 2025, the net interest payment were exceeding all the other categories except for Social Security. So the interest on the debt, it was the number 2 line item now. So that's growing faster than everything else. So in the long term, interest costs are projected to outpace the growth of the economy, which simply means that the US must borrow more money to pay the interest on existing debt unless they try to balance the budget somehow, which that's another conversation. I don't think that's going to happen. So that's number 2. So the structural deficit spending is the third area. So deficits occur basically whenever the government, as I've explained here, exceeds revenue. So that's going to continue as I've made a case for it. So here are the risk scenarios that we face as a country or the government managing all this. The baseline trend basically is the persistence of deficit exists, that debt held by the public could exceed 120% by 2035. Annual deficits may continue over trillion-dollar levels. And we should see, if everything stays the same here, which I don't see how it's going to change, we're going to see another $20 trillion in debt over the next decade. Okay? That's a big number. If economic growth slows, our tax receipts, in other words, income, federal taxes, et cetera, this baseline could be even larger. That's number one. If the Fed has to raise interest rates, this could screw up projections even worse. If slower growth, let's say we head into some sort of a slower growth scenario, another risk is that higher debt pushes out private investment. A classical kind of macroeconomic kind of situation happens. Demographic pressure, as we discussed, as I mentioned with Harry Dent, baby boomers now retiring, at a fast rate, creating more entitlement spending. I think the demographic pressures cause more concern. And then the last one is a recession. If we get a recession, here's our concern on this is that we've been in basically a bull market here for 17 years, ever since that 2009 Great Recession. If a downturn happens, programs like unemployment insurance, other spending on safety net programs will kick in, which is going to raise spending while revenue falls to a slower economic activity, also widening the deficit further. So here's the bottom line. Let me get to this. The U.S. debt situation is in a very serious situation, extremely complex, obviously. I mean, this is macroeconomics and a lot going on here. Even during periods of relatively strong economic years like we've seen here over the last 16, 17 years, deficits remain large. We're at almost $38 trillion in debt right now. If current trends persist, federal debt and interest obligations will continue to grow faster than the economy. So this puts us basically in a very vulnerable position, which means the Federal Reserve will have lost some control. I mean, them raising and lowering interest rates will at some point become ineffective, in my opinion, okay? So successfully managing long-term fiscal stability for them will require deliberate policy choices that are going to be difficult. Revenue income to the government and reducing spending, which in my opinion is not possible. I don't think they're going to be able to increase revenue I think we're going to have a recession at some point, and our two-party system just is not going to be able to balance the budget. People in Congress are, I mean, I think everybody would agree with me. You know, so where do we go from here? You know, we're at a 1.8, $1.9 trillion deficit point of no return, I think. So I've made the case. I think everybody would agree. Where money is complicated now, we've got the US dollar currency as the reserve. We got secondary currency of gold. It's gone through the roof. We got a deficit problem. Where is this going? Here's where I think it is. This is the point I want to make about all this that we have to pay attention to. There's a heist going on, and it's right in front of our eyes. The question that most Americans should be asking is not how large the national debt is, but how the government actually intends to deal with it, right? Here's the uncomfortable answer. The debt is not going to be paid down in any kind of real terms. It's actually going to be neutralized through monetary policy in a far more subtle strategy, and also a very damaging long-term purchasing power scheme. And this is scary, okay? So what does this mean? Well, this strategy does not require Congress to announce anything dramatic, nor does it require them to raise taxes or cut any social programs. Instead, it relies on a process that quietly erodes the value of money, the money that I just described. In fact, the debt does not disappear on paper. It disappears into thin air or real value. It just magically disappears. And it's paid for by anyone who holds US dollars or money sitting in savings accounts, pensions accounts, IRAs, or in banks. If it's in your pocket, it's going to disappear. It's pretty sneaky. It's pretty scary. But let me take a minute back to our debt. So think about this for a second. Roughly 20 cents of every dollar that of your taxes now, that money does not go to building highways, improving our defense, funding education, expanding healthcare. It only services past borrowing, growing debt. It's unsustainable. The situation resembles, it's like making a payment on a credit card whose balance continues to grow faster than we can pay it off. I think I remember as a young guy, I had a credit card. And you know, when I paid high interest rates, and the more I paid on it, the balance kept going up, and that's the kind of situation our government is. Except for this credit card belongs to the world's largest economy, and if default ever happens, it would send a shock throughout the global financial system, right? So they know they can't risk that. That would screw up them as being, I mean, the US as being the leader in the world. So the only way out of this is to devalue the currency and allow inflation to do its nasty stuff. So that's how they're thinking about this. The average interest rate on the national debt right now, by the way, is 3.36%. Think about that for a second. And that was up from 1.6 roughly 6 years ago. So get your mind around this. Every 1%, that interest goes up, that's another $380 billion it costs the US on the debt. Every 1%, $380 billion. So here's the Federal Reserve's dilemma. As you know, they're meeting today, okay? They're going to decide at 2 o'clock whether to reduce the overnight interest rate that banks charge each other. They're expected to announce that they're going to keep rates the same. That's what the street's saying. They're going to meet 8 more times this year, or 7 more times this year, and they're expected to. I think they're expected to drop rates a quarter point 2 times, is what the market is saying. The Fed has attempted to contain inflation and keep it to a target rate of 2%. That's their target rate. Right now, it's at 2.7 to 2.8. So that's kind of where they're gearing it towards right now. The Fed directly controls only overnight rates. Long-term rates are set by the market. So when debt levels grow too rapidly, rising interest rates can trigger a self-imposed debt spiral, it's called. So the higher borrowing leads to higher rates, which leads to a higher deficit. So this is something that happens where we are right now, as we're seeing there's more and more debt kind of in the U.S. government and other governments. We're not alone. I think other governments across the globe have the same situation. So we're seeing spiral debt happen. So there's a higher borrowing that's affecting interest rates. So here's where I'm getting with all this. This is what I mean about putting the Federal Reserve in a difficult situation. This is handicapping them to do anything. They're not going to be able to do much debt monetization. In other words, they're not going to be able to affect what's going on with because inflation is going to start creeping back in. We saw inflation go from 1.4% in 2020 to 7% in 2021 because of they created money out of thin air, right? Remember that? And then 2022, it was 8% inflation. This process is often framed, remember, do you all remember that quantitative easing, they called it? This process was when, right after 2008, 2009, the financial crisis, and in 2020, the COVID thing, is when the Federal Reserve enacted what's called quantitative easing. This is when they roughly created $8 trillion and another $2 trillion. I think it was actually $12 trillion in all. They printed digitally printed $12 trillion in thin air, just push that money into the market. They gave it to corporations, they gave it to individuals, they gave all this money away. So this is called money creation. There is no printing. It's just the digital age. Only reserves were credited on a balance sheet. So the debt still exists, but it's owed to the Federal Reserve itself. On paper, interest is paid, but in reality, the financial burden is shifted only to the currency. All right, Zach, did you get that? The burden is shifted right to the currency. Why the debt doesn't matter until it does, okay? So here's the scary thought. A government that issues debt in its own currency cannot technically go bankrupt. Let me say that again. A government that issues debt in its own currency cannot technically go bankrupt. Why not? Simply because it can always create more money to meet its obligations. It just prints more money. It just keeps printing more money. This idea supports the modern monetary theory. Much of today's policy framework is built around this logic. There's no constraint on borrowing, but only on inflation and devaluing the currency. As long as inflation is manageable to some extent, debt levels are treated as secondary concerns. In other words, they just keep printing more money. The Federal Reserve loans money to itself. Here's the problem, though. Inflation is not abstract. It's a transfer of wealth. Did you get that? Inflation is a transfer of wealth. When the money supply expands faster than the real economic production, the value of each dollar declines. That's what we're seeing right now. In other words, savers are the ones who pay. Wage earners fall behind. That's what we're seeing. That's why we're out there recruiting today. That's why people are listening to what we recruit to. The government's liabilities shrink in real terms. That's why they're not concerned about the rising debt that they do, while the public absorbs the costs. It's the greatest heist that we've ever seen. This travesty is legal, and it's happening very gradually, and no one will know this. It's so politically convenient, and it doesn't even, I mean, it's not a tax. There are no political headlines. But economically, it functions like one. It's the greatest theft that 99% of Americans will never see. They'll never even know it's happening. It's amazing.
Yeah, and
All
people
right,
that live
so
paycheck to paycheck are also in a situation where they never deal in anything except for currency. A US dollar, it gets deposited, it goes right back out, and they get more of it, let's say, in a raise, but it's worth less. And so that's why you've seen housing prices go through the roof, not because houses are worth that much more, it's because the dollar's worth that much less. And
exactly.
so a real asset is where equities come in. It's where, so owning something other than the dollar itself, gold, the reason gold is a hedge is that there's technically, they're still mining for gold and those kind of things, but there's a finite amount of it. It can't be created out of thin air. Whereas an artificial currency, and in 1971, our notes or our currency that we have left the gold-backed standard and became a Federal Reserve note on the full faith and credit of the United States government, which gave them the ability at that point to borrow from thin air.
And
And so,
that dollar, Zach, in 1919, that dollar in 1919 is worth less than 1 penny today.
yeah, yeah,
So that's the game. Okay, so in this environment, Zach, cash becomes a declining asset. Just what you just said. I mean, you just framed it perfectly. So in periods like this, certain financial structures, such as tax advantage insurance-based strategies, which we have, which are designed to protect capital from market volatility, taxation, inflation, while allowing participation and growth in assets that really grow. That's why we're seeing the markets grow, right? I mean, Jody, this is what we do is so important. I can't stress this enough. This is what we do now is just like, oh my gosh. I mean, we're right in the sweet spot. You know, why IUL is such a wonderful product. We like it because it's a 0% floor protection kind of product where it protects again, because we're going to have a correction at some point. And it has tax deferred growth, potential tax-free income through policy loans, as we know, against accumulated cash value. It also has the safe market link growth. You know, in this inflation, you know, the dollar devaluation just last year the dollar was down 10%, and tack on 2.7, 2.8 inflation, you're down 12, almost 13%, right? So life insurance is just a wrapper. I mean, that's all it is. Remember, life insurance that's all it is. Shields against taxes, inflation, and financial impact of death. When you think about it, are you freaking kidding me? There is nothing else that matches the power of this instrument. It's life-changing. The way it can affect families and generations, used properly to help people, it's the greatest instrument there is. And you know, we're here at the right time, the right place in history, and you have the power of your team and coaching. And I mean, knowing what I just told you is going on, I can't stress to you enough where you are, the power of this information, that what the government is doing to us, and to have these instruments that go out and help people. My gosh.
So, Tim, can I ask something really quick?
Sure.
Because we're talking about outpacing inflation, right? So when we get this product like the IUL, that we all know that it's our best all around overall product.
Right.
So if a client asks me how an IUL is going to outpace inflation based on what I understand, and correct me if I'm wrong, when inflation comes, the markets goes up, right?
Right.
That's correct. So if I have my money invested in an IUL, it's going to go with the market. So you not only have a floor when we get that correction that you're not going to lose your money. On top of that, you are going when we get the inflation, the market goes up, so your money goes up with and the IUL. So most likely you're going to be at the same rate that inflation goes. Is that correct?
It's one of the factors, Adolfo. It's one of the factors. So just think of it this way: is you're participating? You're participating basically in the market, but you're also protecting a zero ground floor. And inflation, you're hedging with inflation. You're hedging with against taxation. You're hedging. You're basically preserving wealth in a way that nothing else can compete with it. That's what you're doing. You're protecting families through market volatility. Because we're going to have a correction. It's the cycle that we're going through. Even with inflation going the way it is, we're still going to have a correction. And so during these times of unknown market volatility, when you see markets go up this long for this high, it's going to impact it. And when it comes down, you're going to be perfectly protecting families. And then when it comes back up, they're going to be sitting there being able to participate in the move back up again. So it's the right product at the right time in history where we are right now. We've had some unbelievable years in the market right now. And so it's just the timing on this couldn't be better to get people involved.
Hey, Tim, this is Gail here. Isn't this a great argument for legislative risk and what our policies circumvent?
Absolutely. Absolutely. If anything, I think what we're going to see in Congress is they're probably going to start taxing other things in Congress too. If you think about all the roundabout way of taxation, there's so many different taxes that we're getting hit with today that you can't even sum it all up. It's not just federal taxes. There are so many other taxes. Legislation there's so many other ways that we're getting hit today that I think this is a blanket way of covering ourselves.
Tim,
You guys, this is the last question. Let's just do this because we got a couple
Yes.
other things to cover. Go ahead, Sandra.
one question. Yesterday, I was talking to one of my.
You muted yourself, Sandra.
Sorry about that.
Okay.
He was saying that we were talking about that, the devaluation of the dollar, and how in Argentina and Venezuela, when this happened, the government decided to shed zeros from the value of the at that time, whatever it is, bolivars in Venezuela and Argentina, for the value too. Would it go that crazy that the dollar will go so crazy to that point? Do you think, Tim?
No, not at all.
Okay.
Venezuela is a different issue, obviously. The US dollar is the, leading currency in the world. They could never do that. That would destroy the currency completely. So
Okay.
that never happened here, yeah. But good
Okay.
question. That happens in third world countries as a desperation to back up the currency, they cannot print money like the US government can. So being the lead government in the world, the lead economy, that allows them to do that.
One of the things I really want to emphasize is that this is a message of hope and excitement, and for you to know that what we do is right and how neat it is. Because bottom line is, people need to make more money. People have to make more money.
Right.
You got to understand that right now how important that is. I mean, people are slow to change. They almost won't change when they have to. I mean, you see people that have lung cancer and to keep smoking cigarettes. I mean, you see that all day long, and that's kind of what's going on with the country. But I'm telling you, this plays to our advantage, and we have the answers, and we have the hope, the way we at least can go on the offensive when everybody else is playing defense, and that's the biggest thing. So, Tim, did you have anything else you wanted to add?
Yeah, I just want to add one other thing, Jody. That this is a very complicated point I'm trying to make today to you, and I spent a lot of time. I probably confused you a little bit. I hope I didn't, but I want you to get the point here is that what is going on here ought to motivate you to get out there and tell the story. That's what this is about. Go out and recruit people, because you now have information. You ought to be excited. You should get out after this call and recruit 5 people this week. If you don't get excited after this, because what's going on here is a travesty, and we can help people. We can protect people. We can help families. We can make a difference in people's lives. And just you having this knowledge of what is going on. It's not just our government, it's happening around the world. This is just modern monetary policy that's going on today. They're destroying currencies in order to pay for this overspending. Government bureaucracy is what it is. They're using us. We're on a crusade to save people's lives. That's what we're doing here, Jody.
I know it is. And guys, think about this for a second. Most people hear all this and they go on a Netflix binge because they don't want to deal with reality, because they have no hope. And the average person has no hope off of anything that they just heard. They hear the news with no hope. All we got to do is go recruit a few people. I mean, how complicated is that? Hey, I'm pretty secure in that I know what I don't know. I know that I'm not Zach. I know that I'm not Tim. Heck, by the way, I'm as proud of the people who didn't ask questions as the ones who did speak, because the right 4 spoke. There may be 1 or 2 others that I wouldn't have held my breath if they said something, but the rest of us need to be just listening today. And that's what we did. Okay. And so I'm glad of that. And we are very blessed to have Zach, and very blessed to have Tim on this call every week with their immense, ability to articulate. And he didn't just pull this out of the air. Tim is doing this because he cares about you and about this team. I know that. He loves this. And we were challenged to have a 5x growth. We're going to blow that out of the water. This call is an indicator of where we're headed. You see where everybody's going. There's many people, even of our sideline teammates, Adolfo and others who run their own organizations that don't always participate in this particular call because they got their own calls and stuff. But man, this thing's really, we've captured lightning in a bottle. We're doing a big job on this. Same thing on Thursday nights. So you're doing a great, fantastic job. So I'm very excited. But the bottom line is, I was going to show you a Gladiator quote, but we don't have time. But it's basically, I was going to show you Russell Crowe saying, that what we do here echoes to eternity. That's true. I think that's more true than ever. As we finish up, I'm going to turn a couple of minutes over to Mauricio. Just got 2 specific updates as to how the technology play we have ties into this, but also some new updates we want to let you know.
Before Mauricio talks, I want to just give everybody one easy thing you can talk about coming out of here. And a lot of you hear this word hedge. You hear hedge fund, you hear hedge against this, hedge against that. And if you don't know what that means, it's good to understand exactly what that it's trading one risk for another risk, right? It's a hedge against loss in some cases. And so what Tim's talking about is our message is that the floor, guaranteeing the floor, trading any loss of zero, right? Trading any loss for a little bit of the potential upside is a story that's so easy to tell right now. All of our tactical asset managers, even in the world that we operate in the managed money side, whether we're talking about Paul Dietrich or whether we're talking about the in-house people at Integrity Wealth, they're all unsure of where the market is going. It's behaving like it never has before. But we've also gotten a lot of people that don't understand that, very drunk on success, if you will. They're sitting at the table and they're on a hot streak and they keep winning and they keep winning. And at some point that will stop. And it's our job to go tell everybody, look, maybe the market keeps going up. Great. But we should probably take a little bit of what you got going on and say maybe it doesn't, right? So let's be that voice of reason for people. I think that's really the biggest conversation is even the experts don't know. So if you think you know better than the Paul Dietrichs of the world and the tactical managers that make these decisions, you might want to pump the brakes a little bit. So thank you, Tim, so much. And for everybody that wants to go back and hear that again, this was recorded and it will be out there for you to go back. If you didn't get it all or some of it was over your head and you want to go back and slowly pause and look things up and learn from it, do that. Just don't do it while everybody else is awake. While everybody else is awake, go recruit them.
Hey, tell them where that's at, Zach or Kimberly. Make sure they know we have a team YouTube channel. This is being
it's
posted
HCI
today.
Team Legacy. And I'll put it out in the WhatsApp groups as well. And so every Wednesday is live streamed. We're live streaming now. And I'll repost this particular training from today so you guys have it. But subscribe to that page. When you subscribe, you're notified when we go live, and you can always go back and find it in your YouTube history and use that to your advantage. Mauricio's trainings are on there. Every single Wednesday that we've done for a really long time is live streamed under the live section. So,
And Rafael Preciado, thank you for going and subscribing to that right now. He just did that, so it's fantastic. And then also I wanted to mention something that James reminded me of, and that is that make sure people have this on their recurring calendar, this call, that they know this. And every week it's this level. We're bringing this kind of information. We have that on there every single week, so that your teammates know that and they can move forward. So Mauricio.
Absolutely. Well, I'd like to begin just by telling you that clients typically, I mean, you could be a good salesperson. You could go out there, maybe sell the annuity or sell the AUL just on its features. But what I've learned is that when you show the clients the gaps and where are the problems that they need to solve, then you go from just being able to, be a salesperson to really selling bigger premiums because you are solving a problem. And this whole conversation that I've been hearing about, first of all, on one hand, it kind of just tells me how deep the rabbit hole goes when it comes to money and all that Tim was talking about. But it's also a great segue into why it's so important to know how to explain the rule of 100. There's actually only two types of risks that exist, which is, technically speaking, is a non-systemic, which is what most people are protected against. That's why they have a diversified portfolio in case something goes wrong with one sector or one company. That's why they have different sectors, different companies. That's why that's called non-systemic. But there are these black swan type of events, the 9/11s, the credit and real estate bust, and the dot-coms bubbles, where it's systemic. And what happens when systemic type of scenarios happen, that's when you see the 40, 50, 60, even 90% drawdown, like we've seen in the 29s. And so the rule of 100 that you see in the abacus, it helps you have that conversation. I think I saw in the chat James saying, don't put all the eggs in one basket. Yeah, most people out there may feel that they don't have their eggs in one basket just because they are diversified. But the reality is still in the market. It could be diversified, but it's not protected from a systemic risk, which is when everything is going down. So that's a great opportunity for the IUL conversation. It's a great opportunity for the annuity conversation. And that's when 30, 40, 50%, depending on the client's age, they should consider reallocating to that. So I was just waiting for allow me to share. It said that I can't share my screen and I need to share. So I've been
All
Okay,
good.
thank you so much. All right, thank you. So because we are out of time, I'm going to just point at a few things that you ought to consider. And I was kind of going through this with Kimberly this morning. The FNA tools that you have now go from simple retirement and protection gaps. Like if you want to just have that 10-minute conversation with the client and then collect just two pieces of information, which is retirement and protection gap, what you'll find is that when you go to clients, now you'll see them tagged as retirement and protection gap, and you can generate beautiful reports that can help you explain that to the client. But it only focuses on two primary areas, which is the retirement gap, right? And then maybe it even tells you because it takes the age of the client. It says, hey, you're an ideal candidate for an IUL because you have 27 years before you retire. So if you have 15 years or more to allow for maximum compounding, that makes you an ideal client to incorporate IUL into the mix of other assets you may have. And so it's a very it gives you an opportunity to, even if you're only talking to the client about the insurance gap and the retirement gap, you still give them that Merrill Lynch sort of experience with a beautiful report that educates them maybe why they need to buy insurance now. Because the more they wait, the more expensive it's going to get. It's almost like that cost of waiting when it comes to saving. Now you talk about cost of waiting in not being protected at the same time. Probably the number one question I get from anybody that I'm having a conversation about an IUL is the cost, right? Have the conversation. Say no matter which road you take, you're going to pay about 1.5% over the life of the program. It's just that in traditional retirement accounts, you pay little, but then you pay more over time as the account grows. And the IUL, you pay more in the beginning, get the heavy lifting done because of the insurance, but then it goes down over time. At the end, if you take it to life expectancy, you're going to end up paying about the same in both areas. It's just that the IUL has some features. So again, and we don't have the time to go through the whole training. What I just want to show you is that the reports that you can generate, even to have just that simple conversation, which is let's make sure we close the retirement gap and then we close the protection gap. If you're ready to take eventually that client to the next level, you can always move from here to do a full financial needs analysis, complete. And if you want to do the simple, you could do the simple. And what the simple does is, again, if you go to your clients and you did a FNA simple, like I did this one, MAU, it also produced a beautiful report, but this one addresses the 6 areas that we talk about in HGI, which is increasing cash flow. So it gives the client at least sort of an executive summary of, their monthly cash flow, their total assets, their total debt, their debt to income ratio, that type of information where you now can show the client, look, you're only saving 6% of your income. Your debt to income ratio is such, this is where your money's going, but the way it should go is the 50, 30, 20, etc. So you're educating the client how to manage debt. Right? Based on their situation, what is the foundation that they need to follow? For them, the avalanche method, there's 12 methods to eliminate debt. This system studies their profile and it recommends which is the strategy. For long-term win, you do the avalanche method, which is, this is like pay the minimums on all the debt and put the extra dollars towards the highest rate. And as you pay them, you kind of apply all that to the next one. And then what are the small wins? Again, I just want to show you the look and feel of a report that you can produce for a client that it has all of the compliance you need to go through from the insurance department, from the SEC, FCC, and all of that. The language is just it's trained to not get into language or conversation that will be out of compliance. And if you want to then go to a full financial needs analysis, you can do that here. So again, I guess in short, what I wanted to show you is you now have a full financial needs analysis where you can actually run a full-blown every 40-second financial risk. But this obviously goes deep, and there is actually a full training on this financial needs report that is on the recording, on that link that Kimberly is going to share with you. So I guess, again, summarizing, if you're maybe brand new, you want to start small, you may want to use the retirement and protection gap. If you want to produce a nice report for a client that basically just touches on those 6 areas, but not get too deep into weeds, you can do the F&A simple. And if you, as you progress and you find people that have like a lot of assets, and you want to really show them where all of the gaps are and what they can actually do, then you can take a full F&A and produce a full report that will tell them what is the health score. And you can basically go through each one of these things and what the problem is. Now, for this, you need to actually have a complete F&A done. And there's a full training on this. We've done that full training on this in the past. Another thing that I want to share with you is that the PowerPoint bank is now been completely, it's not that it's been redone, but all of the presentations are here ready for you to download with speaker notes, and they are fully visible. So we eliminated the conflict that Google Slides was creating. We created our own presentation viewer, so you have that. What people love about this page right here is you can actually generate your own presentations. And we trained the AI to make sure that it was compliant with any insurance department, securities regulators, like all the language. If you go in here and you create a presentation because you want to talk, let's say the 20 benefits of the 20 reasons why maybe incorporating an IUL would be a good idea. Like, building about the 20 reasons why an IUL makes sense or can make, even if your prompt is poor, is the rails and the programming behind it is going to protect you from making sure you're not out of line in language. And even if you have typos, it'll understand. Makes sense. Does that make sense to own? I don't know. My brain's not helping me too much. So the title is why own an IUL, right? And so you can go ahead and generate that. You can have a lot more context, obviously. You don't want to be so poor like this. But what I want to show you is that you can actually, if you think about doing events, you can do recruiting events, that would be the priority. And I would suggest you use only the company presentations because those are very well built and they're compliance for opportunity. And you're not going to get that from this tool. But if you are going to do a financial literacy type of presentation, you could do this, like 20 powerful reasons to choose an IUL. That's better title than the one I had. And it gives you more context down here, which you can actually change. So you can make it a 20 or 30 slides presentation because your presentations will typically be about 30 to 40 minutes. Consumers will typically not take more than that. But if I wanted to do a 20 slide presentation on a professional dark or light, it will generate that PowerPoint. And like any AI that we are building now, it takes training. Like you guys have seen the evolution of CyberSource on the landing pages is getting better. So this is also going to get a lot better in terms of design, the look and feel and the options. But just want to kind of give you this so that if you wanted to have events every week or every month and they gravitate around financial literacy, you could do that. I do want to suggest if you want to just double check with Tim on the presentations that you build, just to double check you can go ahead, send them an email. Hey, here's sort of the presentation. I mean, we did train the tool to use compliant language that is in line with what the departments of insurance would expect you to, like when you're building a presentation. It's not recommending any specific company or any specific product. It will never do that. It's not going to recommend a particular product from a particular company, but rather more sort of like just education in nature. And what it did, it created that presentation, and you'll see the actual design. It's going to use some images, and it's going to use big letters to keep it very clean. But at the same time, the speaker note is what will have the context, because it's designed where you don't have like the whole Bible in the slide. You should have basically just the basic presentation on, in the slides, right? And when you download it to your computer, that's where you're going to have the actual context of what you actually say as you go through the slides, if that makes sense. So you can see the speaker notes are here. So it has what you actually can say as you welcome people to the presentation and what you say on each one of these slides, and then you add your personality. And so this came about just people inboxing me and say, hey, can we build this presentation? But there's actually tools that can actually do that. So, and that only stores on your system. Okay, so I think that I see how a lot of like Aki's team operate, where they do a lot of financial literacy, and then they recruit from there. So they first show, and then they give people the taste. And I think with Abacus, you can give people the experience that they'll be not only, they'll get an experience from what a true professional would do, right? And you have a higher chance to recruiting them, for sure. And so if you're still here, maybe one additional thing that I think relates to what we were what Tim was talking about. If you think about where most of people's money is in, I think you would not disagree that most people's money is in IRAs. That's like the lion's share. The market, probably 70% of all the money that makes up the stock market is 401ks, IRAs, 403b. That's all retirement accounts. And so you have this thing here called the super agent skills. And what we added I think in the second meeting tab, we have some videos for you to get some information. We have a video here that's 7 minutes about IRA, sort of the history of the IRA taxation. And then we have the E.F. Hutton, because we're really talking about what? Two things. We're talking about people's retirement, right? We are actually in the retirement planning business. It's the distribution, is the recruiting, but what we ultimately help people with is prepare for retirement. And by doing that in a massive scale, we earn great compensation for helping people do that, and then helping other people learn how to do that. And this becomes the vehicle for creating wealth, solving retirement planning for people. That's what IUL is. Yes, great for protection, but it's also great for supplementing retirement. That's where annuities, well, guess what they are? They are retirement planning tools. Guess what investments are? For those of you that are securities, they are retirement. I mean, you're building those portfolios to eventually live off of the selling a higher value than what you purchased for, or maybe just getting the dividends out of it. You're withdrawing at a certain rate. So these two tools will give you a very deep understanding of what is the role of insurance. People are talking about legislative risk, right? What happens when inflation goes up? Does the market always goes up? Well, it depends, right? But anyways, we don't have time to dive deeper. These two videos will open up your eyes wider and will give you great language and facts, history that you can then educate your clients with, and it'll lead to huge sales. I can tell you, I can attest for my biggest IUL sales in history were because understanding the E.F. Hutton story. Like understanding that people, what if the insurance company go right? Or what if the government does this? Or what if all that's answered here? You have the whole history. You have it in Espanol and you have it in English. These are great videos for you to watch. Again, that would be in Agent Super Skills under the second meeting presentation. And these are not things that you have to show your client or anything. You can, but it's mainly for you to understand a little bit more just how solid of a business you're really in and what are the type of problems that we're solving. And with that, we're 15 minutes over time, but Jody, if there's any questions, I don't know if there's time for questions or not, or we can
No,
close.
let's hold the
I'll turn it back to
questions,
you.
hold the questions and then get them on your trainings, which take place weekly. And we are going to have overall training with our team when it comes to this stuff as well. Two things I wanted to make sure you got from what he said is that now those new programs, you're able to go in and prompt them and use them, the presentations. Secondly, is that you're able to create a database off the information you put in there and it saves. So amazing day. Now let's go act on it, go tell our story, open our mouth, pick a simple concept, whether it's the Rule of 72, whether it's living benefits, whether it is tax-free retirement, whatever concept floats your boat, go tell it to somebody, to 10 people today. And then every one of you get a guest on tomorrow night, 9 o'clock. It's going to be World Class Bob. Same Zoom line here, 9 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. Thanks, guys. Tremendous day.